So far in this course, we've been looking at arguments generally, the parts of arguments, their structure, and how to make them clearer. But now we're going to turn to looking at the actual premises, the contents of the premises, and trying to make good premises in ways to figure out whether a premise is good or a bad one. So generally, good arguments will have good premises. Ideally, we'll have premises that are true, premises that are not false. But it's hard for everyone to agree whether a premise is true or whether it's false, or to prove that it's true or to prove it's false. So to get a good argument, we at least want something like a premise that is, we can say, intuitive. This is a very common word to use in philosophy. A premise is intuitive, meaning that when you understand the premise, it's something that you feel like, yes, I agree with it at least initially. My gut reaction or my initial or first reaction to the premise is that, yeah, it looks like it's true. So we often say the premise is intuitively true, or I have the intuition that it's true. Alternatively, we say the premise looks plausible. The premise is plausible, or I find the premise plausible. So we want to have premises that are intuitive or premises that are plausible, that your readers will find intuitive or plausible. And these will count as good premises to have in an argument. On the other hand, you could have bad premises, and these are premises you do not want in your argument. Sometimes we'll say it's implausible. The premise is implausible, or I find the premise implausible. Sometimes we'll say it's counterintuitive. It's when I first look at it, it doesn't seem right to me. When I first look at your premise and understand it, it doesn't seem right to me. It seems wrong. So we might say the premise is counterintuitive, or I find it to be counterintuitive. Or worst of all, the premise might seem absurd. We'll say the premise is absurd. This is basically the strongest negative reaction statement you can make about a premise. This is very rarely said because it's so strong. If you really feel that the premise is wrong or it's definitely mistaken in some way, you can say absurd. But this is a very strong way of stating it. If you want to say something gentler, which is more common, you'll say it's implausible or it seems counterintuitive. So we're going to look at various ways to test whether premises are good or bad. And we'll look at premises that use analyses and also premises that use analogies in the rest of this class. So let's begin with analyses. Analyses and conditionals. Analyses try to reveal what other concepts are included in a concept. A concept is like an idea. So analyses come in conditional form, such as if, then. So if something is an apple, then it is a fruit. So in this analysis, we're looking at the concept of being an apple, and we're trying to reveal what other concepts are included in this concept. In the concept of being an apple, well, that includes being a fruit. If something's an apple, then it's a fruit. So we're breaking down this concept into, say, its component parts, or what's included in it. So here's one sort of analysis. It's in conditional if-then form. If something is an apple, then it is a fruit. But analyses could come in biconditional form, which uses the phrase if and only if. So here's a very popular and famous biconditional analysis. Someone is a bachelor if and only if they are an unmarried man. So this is an analysis because it's taking this concept of being a bachelor and it's trying to reveal what other concepts are included in this. Well, Being unmarried is included in the idea of being a bachelor. And being a man is included in the idea of being a bachelor. So now let's look at conditionals and biconditionals and their structure and how they work. So conditionals, as we saw, this is a conditional. It uses the form if, then. If something is an apple, then it is a fruit, for example. So conditionals have an antecedent. This is the part that is in the if part, and a consequent. And it said that the antecedent is sufficient. It's a sufficient condition for the consequent. So that's what this conditional tells us. It tells us that this is sufficient for being this. In other words, being an apple is a sufficient condition for being a fruit. That's what this conditional tells us. It also tells us that the consequent is a necessary condition for the antecedent. Or in this particular example, being a fruit is a necessary condition for being an apple. So that means in order for something to be an apple, it's necessary for it to be a fruit. But this also tells us that being an apple is sufficient for that thing to be a fruit. Conditionals also come in many different forms. We've already seen this form. If something is an apple, then it is a fruit. But it could also take this form. Something is an apple only if it is a fruit. So instead of using the phrase if, then, it instead says only if. But this phrase has the same meaning as this phrase. So you can rewrite this phrase in terms of this one, and it'll have philosophically the same meaning. Again, this has an antecedent, something is an apple, and a consequent, it is a fruit. Yet another form is this. Something is a fruit if it's an apple. So here we have an if over here. And this has the same meaning as the other two. But the main difference is that the consequent and the antecedent are switched. The antecedent is over here, it's an apple, and the consequent is over here. Something is a fruit. So if you ever see these forms, they mean the same thing as this. Just make sure you put the antecedent and the consequent in the right places. So you can always just change these into this and have the same meaning. Now let's turn to biconditionals. Consider these two conditionals. If something is an apple, then it's a 苹果. And if something is a 苹果, then it's an apple. Well, we can combine these. If we combine them, we would form a biconditional. We would form this biconditional. Something is an apple if and only if it is a 苹果. So the biconditional contains more information than just a single conditional. It includes both of these conditionals. And this biconditional has a left side and a right side. We don't really call them an antecedent or a consequent. We just call it the left side and the right side. So this biconditional tells us a lot of information. It tells us that the left side is a necessary and a sufficient condition for the right side. It also tells us that the right side is a necessary and sufficient condition for the left side. So we say that the one side is a necessary and sufficient condition for the other side. And in this particular case, we say that being an apple is a necessary and sufficient condition for being a 苹果. And also that being a 苹果 is a necessary and sufficient condition for being an apple. Okay, now let's do this exercise. First, consider these two sentences. Paul is happy, Paul listens to music. Write a conditional where the first is the antecedent and the second is the consequent. Then write a conditional where the first is the consequent and the second is the antecedent. Finally, write a biconditional. Next, consider these two properties, being handsome, being a singer. Write a conditional in which the first property is a necessary condition for the second property. Then write a conditional in which the first property is a sufficient condition for the second property. Next, consider these two properties, being true, being believable. Write a conditional according to which the second property is a necessary condition for the first property. Then write a conditional according to which the first property is a sufficient condition for the second property. Next, separate the following biconditional into the two conditionals it implies. Paul is a bachelor if and only if Paul is an unmarried man. Finally, consider the conditional, fruits are tasty if they are ripe. State the antecedent of the conditional, and then rewrite the conditional using the phrase only if, while keeping the same meaning. Okay, so we've been looking at conditionals and biconditionals, their parts, and how the parts relate to each other. Now we're going to look at counterexamples. A counterexample is an example used to show that some generalization doesn't always hold. So if your conditional is a generalization, then this will give you a way to test that generalization, to show that that generalization is false. So, for example, take this conditional. If something is a fruit, then it is an apple. So a counterexample to this generalization is something that satisfies the antecedent. Again, this is the antecedent. So to satisfy the antecedent means that the example that you've taken is a fruit. But something that does not satisfy the consequent. So to say that it doesn't satisfy the consequent is to say that that thing is not an apple. So essentially, a counterexample to this is something that is a fruit and is not an apple. Can you think of any counterexamples? Well, there's tons. Some counterexamples would be oranges. Oranges are fruits, but they are not apples. Bananas are also fruits, but they're not apples. Watermelons, fruits, but not apples, etc. There's lots of counterexamples to this. So having a counterexample, a good counterexample like that, shows that this conditional is false, that it's not a good premise, it's a bad premise. So counterexamples are very useful ways to test your conditionals, to test your conditional analyses of a concept. Does the concept of being a fruit really include being an apple? Well, no, because there are all these counterexamples. So in order to make a good conditional premise like this, you want a conditional that doesn't have counterexamples to it. And premises that do have counterexamples, good counterexamples, are not good premises. Last class, a student asked me whether counterexamples are the same thing as counterarguments, and they are not the same thing. One reason for this is that counterexamples are just examples. See, an orange is a counterexample to this principle. Bananas are counterexamples to this. So counterexamples are just an example, whereas counterarguments are arguments. They have premises and conclusions. This does not have any premises or conclusions. It's just an example. So counterexamples are not the same thing as counterarguments, though you can use counterexamples to formulate a counterargument. So now let's turn to actual examples in the history of philosophy where counterexamples have been used. So let's start with an example in ethics. Here's a famous experiment, a thought experiment. A thought experiment is just an experiment you do in your own mind. You just think about this example. This thought experiment is called the trolley problem. Here we have a trolley, which is basically just a train. It's going choo-choo. And here these are the tracks the train is going down, and there's 5 people here tied to the tracks. These are ropes. They can't get out because they are tied here. Okay? So the train is going to kill them if it keeps going this way. Splat, 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 splat. They all die, right? But there's a different set of tracks that leads this way. And if the train went this way instead, it would only kill 1 person. Additionally, you are right here with a lever. This lever decides whether the train goes this way or this way. So what should you do? Right now the train is going this way and it's going to kill 5 people. Should you let it go this way, or should you turn this so that the train goes this way and kills only 1 person? It's said that intuitively the correct answer is that you should turn this so that the train only kills 1 person. So this example is often used to support the idea that if an action has the best consequences amongst alternatives, then it is the morally right thing to do. And it seems to support this principle because, this action, sending it over here, has the best consequences. And so it seems like the morally right thing to do. Whereas this one has worse consequences and doesn't seem like the right thing to do. So you should choose this one because of its consequences. But now, some people bring out counterexamples to the principle. So consider this. This is supposed to be a doctor here, right? He's wearing his mask, a doctor's mask. So this doctor has many patients that are very sick and need organs. So this patient, they are dying, and they need a heart. And if they don't get their heart, they're going to die soon. And this person, they need a kidney. And this person needs another kidney. And this person needs lungs. And this person needs a stomach. And without these parts, all these people are going to die. The problem is that the doctor doesn't have any way to save these people. Except you are there, and he knows that he could kill you so that he could use your organs and save the 5 people. He could take your heart and save this person, take your lungs, save this person, take the stomach, save this person, etc. So, should he let the 5 people die, or should he kill you to save the 5 people? It is said that in this case, it seems intuitively wrong to kill you in order to save these people. That seems like the morally wrong thing to do. So this is used as a counterexample. This is an example in ethics. It's used as a counterexample to this principle that we just saw. Because in this case, killing the healthy man to save the 5 patients has the best consequences. It saves 5 people and makes you lose only 1 person. So it satisfies the antecedent. It has the best consequences. But killing the healthy man is morally wrong. It's wrong to just kill someone healthy to save other people. So this is a counterexample because it fulfills the antecedent, it satisfies it, but it doesn't satisfy the consequent. It is the morally wrong thing to do. Let's look at another counterexample in the case of epistemology. So consider the principle, if a belief is true and justified, then the belief is knowledge. This might seem like a plausible principle, a plausible premise or an intuitive premise, because, well, if I believe something, say I believe that the sky is blue, and it's true that the sky is blue, and I'm justified in believing it because, hey, I look at the sky and I see that it's blue, then it seems that my belief that the sky is blue is knowledge, that I actually know that the sky is blue. So this might seem like a plausible principle. But here's a counterexample. Suppose you're looking at a clock. The clock says 12 o'clock. So you form the belief, it's 12 o'clock. I believe it's 12 o'clock. But now suppose that this clock is broken. These don't actually move. These hands don't move. It's stuck right there. The clock is broken. So this clock is only right twice every day. It's right at 12 o'clock a.m. and right at 12 o'clock p.m. And suppose also that the clock happens to be right at this very moment, that it actually is 12 o'clock, but the clock just happens to be right. Because if it was actually 2 o'clock right now, the clock would be wrong. So this is a counterexample to this principle, because the belief is true and justified. It is true that it is 12 o'clock right now, and your belief that it's 12 o'clock is justified because you made your belief, you formed your belief on the basis of seeing a clock that is usually reliable. But your belief is not knowledge, since it's just luck that the clock is correct at that very moment. It's just luck that the clock is correct right now. If you looked at the clock in 2 hours, you would have been mistaken. So this is a counterexample to this principle because it satisfies the antecedent, but not the consequent. Now let's do an exercise. So begin with this. For each claim, give a counterexample. If something is a shape, then it has at least one corner. So for example, a square has 4 corners, right? This is a square, it has one corner here, one corner here, one corner here, one corner here. So this claims that every shape has at least one corner. For the next one, each Chinese surname is made up of only one Chinese character. The next part, for each pair of properties, state whether the first property is a sufficient condition, a necessary condition, neither a sufficient nor a necessary condition, or both a sufficient and a necessary condition for the second property. So that's saying, is this property a sufficient condition for this? Is it a necessary condition for this? Not a sufficient nor a necessary condition, or both sufficient and necessary condition for this? And then use counterexamples when appropriate to justify your answer. So the pairs of property you're supposed to consider are being a dog and being an animal, then being brown and being tasty.